Exactly. Good morning, everybody. Wisconsin's 25th District Senator Romaine Quinn is back for our monthly chat today, Thursday, January 30th, 2025. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, and you're watching DrydenWire Live, presented by Americans for Prosperity Wisconsin. AFP Wisconsin works to reignite the American dream and break down government barriers that hold us back from our full potential. Visit AFPWisconsin.com and join AFP to fight for more freedom for all Wisconsinites. Romaine, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
I looked up this morning because I actually have like a list of things to talk to you about, which is rare because you come on the last Thursday of every month. But we didn't do a show last month because of the holidays, right? December. And then
Right.
we didn't do it in November on that Thursday because that was Thanksgiving. And then I
Right.
looked in the three before that, we had Chance Green with you on, Duke Tucker, and Dave Armstrong. So the last time you and I actually chatted, just the two of us, was in July. And you were in D.C., if I remember right.
Oh, yeah. When I went out to testify on Tom's bill. So
I
I
know.
haven't even followed that lately. I haven't talked to Tom about the national park piece. I don't even know where that sits.
I don't either. I know he kind of put a pin in it, but no, he did talk about it when he was on the show that it was just the last show that he was on a couple weeks ago. That,
Sure.
they're going to, kind of start moving that forward a little bit, I think. So I have a whole bunch of things I've written down here, and one was actually a text from someone to ask me to ask you,
Uh-oh.
and I don't understand it. And I said, I'll ask. They said just bring up red line replacement in Superior. Now, I don't know if that was like auto-corrected or something. I don't know what that's about. Do you?
Yeah, I think they meant lead line. Lead.
Lead line. Got it.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
So,
what is that about?
yeah, Representative Green and I introduced a bill just last week that would allow residents in Superior to receive federal help for lead line replacement. So I didn't know this. Superior is unique. As far as we can find, they're the only utility in Wisconsin, as a municipal level, that is privately owned. So across the country, there's a lot of privately owned municipal utilities. Sorry, I'm trying to get my brain working this morning. But Wisconsin, it's kind of rare, so it's an anomaly for us. And because of that, state law does not allow private utilities to tap into federal supports through our drinking water program here in Wisconsin, which is actually it's a drawdown for federal funds. So what we want to do is say, hey, the Superior residents today did not determine whether or not their utility should be privately or publicly owned. They're not the ones that put the lead pipes in the ground. And so they're also a federal and state taxpayer. So why are they the only ones in Wisconsin that has to pay to replace these lead lines on their own with no help, while every other community can access loans and grants with federal and state support to replace these lead lines? So we introduced a bill to repeal that, to allow Superior Power, Light, and Water, I mixed their acronym up, to be able to access those loans. Because if not, I had people reach out and they said, well, why doesn't the utility just pay for it? Yeah, the utility is you. It is privately owned, but your rates are going to pay for it. So you could say, don't give Superior Light and Water any help, make them pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the problem. It's only the people in Superior are going to pay for it, while people in Superior are paying to replace lead lines in other communities because you're a state and federal taxpayer. So we just want to even the playing field. We don't want Superior residents to bear the brunt of it all on their own. I think they should have support for that, and so we introduced the bill.
And is it well received?
Yeah, I went and toured the utility just this last week. I got to tour the water department. They do gas and power as well, but this is specific for their water department because we're talking about lead water lines and laterals. And so they told me they've got about 3,800 customers in the city of Superior that still have a portion of their lead pipes that go to their house as lead. So it could be from the shutoff to their house, or it could be from the sidewalk out to the main line. And so there's a whole mix of them, right? And so it costs on average about $10,000 to $15,000 to replace that lateral. And so we could say do nothing and throw it on the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
You could raise everyone's rates in Superior to pay for the 3,800 left, or you could allow them, like every other community, to access those grants. So I've heard there's a little bit of drama in Superior because I think the city themselves want to buy the utility at some point. But the point is that could take years, and we have lead pipes now.
Mm.
And so there's another grant cycle coming up. So we have to allow that access sooner than later. So we're not going to wait around for local politics to figure this out. We're going to get Superior residents help as soon as we can.
Well, speaking of federal grants, I should ask you about that. But first, we have a question, I believe, in here. And good morning, Mike Schaefer.
Good question, Mike. Good morning.
Good question.
Yeah.
Good morning. That's funny. Now, I don't know if this is going to be able to fit on the screen here. It's hard to kind of read it. You've been quoted previously as the child care market should play itself out. My nephew, who is a nurse in Rice Lake, just pulled his 4 kids out of child care after the tuition went up. Do you think investing in child care to stabilize the market would prevent working class people from getting priced out of child care?
Yeah, and some of this does have to play out, right? But we know the model that we have right now is broken. I was in Madison just yesterday. I got home last night about 9:30, and 3 of my meetings throughout the day were different entities, either childcare providers or organizations that represent childcare providers. So there is a whole host of issues to unpack for childcare, and COVID exacerbated the problems that we already knew existed, in the industry. So you've got a combination of staff that aren't paid enough, parents who can't afford the rates that'd be needed to cover staff wages to attract them. So it's an industry that's been pounded by inflation too. So if I'm a child care center owner, I might not be able to raise my rates much higher because I'm pricing parents out. But my cost for food went up to feed these kids. My utilities are up. My property taxes are up.
No.
And I'm losing my staff because instead of making $12 an hour, they can go to Quick Trip. And we see this across every industry, right? Rice Lake Wayne Systems and Rice Lake has like 45 openings. Henry Firearms has opening. I mean, all these manufacturers are short people. So it's not just the childcare industry, but this gets worse when a childcare center loses a worker and now mom or dad has to stay home. So the problem at the manufacturers are compounded when mom or dad has to leave the workforce to stay home with the kids because they can't actually afford to put them in childcare. So there's a number of solutions out there being debated. There's a number of differences. There's people in the legislature that don't think it's their job to pay for someone else's childcare. They're your kids. We already pay for them once they get into public schools, but it's your job to figure that out. Now, the days of Mayberry and grandma and grandpa watched the kids for us because we had lots of family and lots of help, are kind of gone. Most grandparents are still working full-time jobs. Yeah. They're not at home able to watch the kids and run them around for you as a working parent. So life's changed, family structures have changed, and I think we have to come to realize that the structure of childcare that we've grown accustomed to is just not working anymore in today's climate. So long-worded answer, yes, I support finding ways to figure out how to get more funds in these facilities. There's differences in how to do that. Some want to just cut a check to facilities. Some want to cut checks to parents, and then you pay for your slot, at these facilities. So there's a whole host of ways to do it, and I'm hopeful this session that we find a solution that everyone can live with and get across the finish line.
Well, I want to ask if there's a difference. You said there's multiple views and different ways to kind of approach this. I'm assuming Democrats probably align with one kind of thinking, Republicans another, because that's just usually how it goes. But is there a consensus in the Republican Party? Is there a consensus there where we actually like this plan, or is it even in our own caucus, it's like we have 3 different options, and which one do we do?
No, it's the latter, right? There is no consensus. There is a consensus that we're not going to continue the Child Care Accounts program, which was a direct subsidies to centers based on a formula of what kids they had and whatnot. And so that program in my mind is dead. So remember, it was a federal program. It was during COVID. The feds funded it to a tune of 300 and some million, and then they cut it off. And now everyone's going, why aren't you funding this? And I'm going to say, well, why isn't the federal government funding this? Why is it that every time the feds start a program and shut the spigot off, now state taxpayers are supposed to pick up the bag? So the problem is there just isn't the votes for that. And I've told providers that I've told the interest groups that. There's not the votes for that. So what else can we do? Maybe it's going to be expanding eligibility for shares. We already have a subsidy program to support parents who can't afford the full cost of care. Maybe we raise the limit so more families can get into that program, and we sink money into that to make sure the prorations don't go down as we add more people, and then they can afford the care in those facilities. There could be a thing where we do a direct wage increase for workers. We did that with primary care workers, CNAs in our nursing homes. We sunk more money through Medicaid, and we said we want this to go to the worker, not to the facility. Want it to be a pass-through directly to bump the wages of those CNAs that are doing the work that we need for our elderly folks in Wisconsin. Could we do the same for childcare workers? I don't know, but something will happen. I think there's an overall agreement. It's not working. And we have to do something. It's just, what is that something?
Sure. Shasta says, and again, I apologize. We were with your screen, and it's not really showing it the way that I was hoping for this to show on our screen. But Shasta has just commented, they are saying that it is not everyone else's job to pay for childcare, but we have seen so many school districts open childcare programs. The public ends up subsidizing care for school district operated programs.
So this has also been exacerbated by schools starting 4K programs. And so when you pull 4-year-olds out of these childcare facilities, those are the kids that, right or wrong, are the cheapest to take care of. They're more independent. You can have more based on what you're licensed for. And so it helps subsidize the cost of the more expensive kiddos, like babies, right? They have a 4-to-1 staff ratio, and obviously takes a lot more care to make sure babies are safe in a child care facility. So when you pull all the kids that you make money on out of the system, and you're left with all the kids you can't make money, and then we go, I wonder what happened. Why the facility closed? Because they don't make any money, and they can't, the way it's structured. So we have a bill in draft right now that I believe, I don't know, it's going to make both sides mad. Democrats want full funded all day 4K in the general education formula. Right now, those kids only count as like 0.65. So my bill would say, fine, fully fund them at one full student, but at the same time, allow universal 4K choice. And as soon as you say choice, Democrats lose their mind, right? Because they think vouchers or private schools or whatever. But I, as a parent, if I have a 4-year-old, which I've got one, or he'll soon be 4, why is it that I feel pushed to send him to the public school right away at 4K because it's free, when I have a 4K program that exists where I send him for childcare now, but I would have to pay for that? And so the formula essentially forces me to send my kid to the public school that much earlier, versus if he stayed in that childcare program out in the community, then those, again, monies help subsidize the cost of parents with 2-year-olds and 1-year-olds and babies. So we would like to see, excuse me, an opportunity for parents to say, it's public funded, it's a 4K program, there's curriculum just like school. But if I want to send my kid to a 4K program out in the community, I should be allowed to do that, and the funding should follow that child. So it'd be an injection of cash into these facilities that keep losing these 4-year-olds, because parents are pulling them out as fast as they can, because I don't want to pay for it, or financially it's a struggle. And if it's free at the school, why wouldn't I send them there, right? So it doesn't solve everything, but it could stop this outflow of 4-year-olds out of these facilities. It could bring a new injection of cash into these facilities and hopefully keep them afloat longer until we, again, figure out more solutions.
You said that wouldn't make everybody happy. Who would be upset with that one?
So
both sides would be upset with that?
Yeah, because there's, so for instance, if I want to send my kid to the 4K program at St. Joe's or a private facility, and it's not a public institution, should that money be going only to the schools and not to these facilities, right? So I think we might turn some Democrats off. And on the flip side, I know there's Republicans that don't maybe want to fund full day 4K, right? They might view it as daycare, not necessarily just schooling, and that it should still fall on the parent because those are your kids. It's not the taxpayer's problem. So we'll see what happens.
Well, keep us updated on that. Seriously, I mean, it seems though we end up talking about this relatively frequent, and we have questions from this regarding childcare almost every time that you're on.
Yep.
So we'll continue, but we have like 5 more things to get to. But real quick, speaking of some federal grant things, obviously this is more of a nationwide story, but it does impact our areas. I had fielded several calls yesterday and some texts about, because I'm also on the Washburn County Board. Is there's ADRC and DHS that could essentially be impacted, and what's the role? And I know the Benjamin House, down in Rice Lake. There was questions there. I was talking to Fitzy, Sheriff Fitzgerald, yesterday. And he said he's been fielding tons of calls because there was the federal, like a freeze on federal grants.
Sure.
And all those programs that has like real local impacts, not just for like people's jobs. It's also what are those programs and who are they helping, including like mental health professionals who are helping out kids at schools. And there's a grant for that. And it's like, well, we can't just like stop seeing these kids that we've been working with for 2 years. Did you field a lot of those calls? Oh, by the way, obviously everybody I think knows that was rescinded, but I'm assuming something similar to that will come down the pike, hopefully a little more spaced out, a little more planned, rather than just turn the faucet off. That's kind of a shocker. Did you field, or your office field, calls in the last couple of days about that?
Actually, it wasn't that significant. I've heard the chatter, the concern, but it was at the same time, the president's coming in. There are hundreds of billions of dollars still floating out from the previous administration. We've all seen the laundry lists of programs or entities that are getting these funds that probably aren't doing what the public expects them to do. No. And so, you've got a new sheriff in town. He comes in and says, just stop for a second. Let some of my people get in place. And let's review to make sure that the funds are following the executive orders, the flurry of them I've already issued, No more funding for DEI or things like that. And so making sure that these programs that no one's going to cut, but they're actually complying with the other orders. Now, I think in his statement on the rescinding of it, clearly the court cases and all the talk is taken away from the intent and the changes he's trying to do. So he said, fine, repeal that back so we can focus on what we're actually trying to accomplish. And then, but just beware, these department heads will go through and make sure this money is spent correctly and following the other executive orders. So could have been handled differently.
Yeah, I'm not against it at all.
Right.
But just, the how that kind of, rolled out certainly was a question mark. We have a question here. Man, I got this whole thing all screwed up. I should have never changed anything. Does the Constitution give Congress the right to distribute funds or not?
Right. Yeah, they distribute the funds, and then the executive branch follows out Congress's orders, And so there's a lot of gray area in there. What was spending based on executive order, what wasn't, what policies are in the expenditures that can be impacted by executive order. So, we're having those constitutional questions even in Wisconsin. So,
all right. Well, we have 4 more things I want to get to here, and we'll do all that in 15 seconds after a word from Mike Schaefer, Spooner Health.
Compassion is at the center of everything we do. It's rooted in who we are and why we're here. It unites us as providers, neighbors, and as a community. Learn more at spoonerhealth.com.
So I said at the very beginning of the show, the last time that you and I were on, just the 2 of us, was back in July. So I have a few things written down, and a couple of these were press releases that your office had sent out. The first one here says Senator Romaine Quinn appointed to Joint Committee on Finance. I think you and I think Rob Staffschulte, I think he's even on there now too. Is this something that you wanted, or it was like you kind of got volunteered and it's, I don't want to do this job? Because that doesn't sound super fun.
Well, it depends on your definition of fun. But no, I wanted it, It's hard to get on it. There's only so many spots.
How many are there? 12? 8?
Gosh, 16. It's 8 and 8. And then they're broken apart by Senate, Assembly. And then it's based on the makeup of your houses, So there's more Republicans and Democrats on it. And this is the committee that will go line by line and set the expenditures for the budget. So I want to be on it because I want to be in the room these decisions are made before they come out and say, hey, this is what we're doing, So every committee I ask for, even from the days in the Assembly, they're not the flashiest, they're not the sexiest, But I know the issues that come through those committees are going to directly impact our district. And so I want to have that input ahead of time before we go to the floor and I'm saying, wow, this stinks, or wow, this is really good, So I'm hoping to be able to impact and steer the ship as we're going along before we get to that finish line. So it's going to be busy. My staff are going to be very busy. We have been assigned budget areas specifically. So we're overseeing DPI, Department of Public Instruction, which is very important right now. It's going to be interesting coming up, especially with the DPI race coming up in
I
April.
have that one written down, by the way. We'll be talking about that.
Yep. And then we've got the UW system, always important conversations. We saw President Roth come out and say, I need $845 million. And if I get that money, then I won't cut the 2-year colleges like UW Barron County. This was after we had a conversation with him in my office where he said, yeah, your enrollment's fine. You should be fine to stay open. So a lot of posturing, a lot of conversations that have to happen between now and then. But I get to be the one having these conversations, which is important for our district. So I'm excited.
How many meetings have you had, or have you had any actual meetings yet? I mean, you had some meetings, but I mean, has the 16 of you met yet?
We met one time after the governor's state of the state, or it was before. It was on the day of the state of the state. We had to do some past review on some DOJ settlements, which is another lawsuit we're locked into, whether or not the legislature gets oversight of these settlements. So that was fine. That meeting was 4 minutes long. So I'm like, hey, this JFC thing's not so bad. Everyone's complaining about it. It goes till 10 at night. I'm like, jeepers, I get on there and we got a 4-minute meeting. So, so we met one time, but it's early, right? So now we're meeting with stakeholders. I was in Madison yesterday and the day before. Each day we're back to back every half an hour with a new group coming in and saying, here's our needs, here's our priorities. So we'll have 10, 12 meetings a day, different groups saying, they do mental health, county association, all sorts of issues, right? And they're all looking for support. And then we dice the pie up, right? We're going to decide, what are we setting aside for tax cuts? What are we setting aside for new spending? And then where does that spending go in what pots?
I remember that's when I first got to know Tom Tiffany, now Congressman Tom Tiffany. Well, this was years ago when he was in the Senate and he was on that same committee. And he'd reached out to me, and I don't even remember how he even knew about us because he was more northeast Wisconsin. But he said, I'd like to do like a weekly update. And
Awesome.
And he ended up just sending a video. He'd record it down there. And it was like a 4-minute thing, and he kind of tailored it to DrydenWire. And, hey, DrydenWire viewers, here's your weekly update on the budget. And it was really kind of cool, actually, for him to kind of do that. It's a little inside baseball-ish. And like, this is where we are, this is what we're working on. This is what I like, what I don't like. It was kind of neat. We did that. And I forgot, he was on that committee as well.
Yeah, he was on there for, I think, 3 budgets.
Yeah.
And it's good to have different perspectives, right? Like, he had great influence over, how stewardship operated across the state, especially in northern Wisconsin. So, having some of those perspectives on the budget committee is super important. And it's going to be great to have Rob on there with me.
Yeah. Next
door to us, another northern Wisconsin guy.
Love it.
We've got Shannon Zimmerman in Hudson. Technically that's northern Wisconsin. If you talk to people in Madison, Hudson, I would consider it western Wisconsin, but that's all right. So and Mary Felskowski, from Tomahawk, she was on the committee and she moved up to Senate president. So she's only the second female Senate president in the Senate's history, and she is she's the first Senate president female as well, north of Highway 8. So
really.
I think it's going to be an exciting session.
Now, are you going to be able to get anything done right now? I mean, I know a few people down at Madison, and I rely on like 4 or 5 people that I send text. We kind of have a group text thing, and they kind of give me the behind the scenes stuff. And my understanding, at least when I talk to them, that there's a lot of things in the Supreme Court that it's kind of holding things up, and not 100% sure how this year is going to be interesting, is what they're saying. How do you feel? Is this a normal cycle, or there's a lot of court cases right now going on? How much is that going to impact the legislature's ability to get something done?
So that's a loaded question because I could spend this whole show on this. So right now, the public's probably not aware, but we are staring down the barrel of some serious constitutional questions and what role the legislature plays, not only in the budget, but even day-to-day operations. So, as many of you know, there's the governor's veto that, locks schools into spending for 400 years, right?
Right.
So the question is whether or not, can the governor lock spending in? As we had a question earlier, doesn't the legislature appropriate the funds? We had the veto over Act 20, the reading and literacy bill. And so in the past, we'll pass a bill with no money in it, set up the framework, and then in the budget, we'll work to secure those funds in a supplemental appropriation, and we'll come back and ask for the money. We're getting sued saying that, no, those are two in the same. You can no longer pass a bill and then 4 months later pass a budget and say they're separate. They want to tie these together because that way the governor would be able to line item every single bill we do. Right now, the governor cannot line item non-fiscal spending bills. So what does that mean? We could pass a bill about anything and he could be striking words out. So this would fundamentally change. It's literally never happened before. Like, the first thing you do when you go in as a legislator is the governor can veto your whole bill. But if there's spending in it, he could line item veto it, just like he does the budget. But to turn this on its head, to say he could literally go in with a stroke of a pen and pick apart any bill on any topic for any reason, even with no spending, it would radically change how we operate. So we have to figure that out first. That has to be settled. The 400-year veto piece has to be settled. But what I would say the lawsuit that scares me the most is whether or not we have the right as a legislature to pause or stop agency rules. So right now we have a separate committee. It's called JCRER. It's the Joint Committee for Review of Administrative Rules. And so you come to me and say, Romaine, we should pass a bill on deer hunting, right? And so we write it up and then we give the agency the authority and we say, DNR, go do this. And the DNR will then promulgate rules to turn around and enforce the law that we passed, right? Because we probably weren't that prescriptive. We said, here's what we want, but go figure out the amount of tags and the date of the season, and they'll write rules for that. The legislature still has oversight through that rules committee to say, time out, DNR or agency, you're not following legislative intent. Here's what we meant. This rule goes too far. And so we can object and stop it. Right now, we're in front of the Supreme Court, and they're trying to say, once you pass the bill, you're out of the picture. There's no more oversight, and agencies are an arm of the executive branch, and it's up to them for the enforcement side. So think about that. On my way out of office, I was put on that committee briefly, and we objected to adding the meningitis vaccine on the list of schedule required for all K through 12 public school kids. Someone had objected to it, and it wasn't added. So if this goes away, any agency could write any rule at any time, and we would have no oversight. So take DHS. Could they write a rule tomorrow and say, you know what, the COVID-19 vaccine is required and on the list for every K-12 student in the state of Wisconsin? I think there could be a lot of parents that could have a lot of issues with that, right? Or you could say, every realtor in the state of Wisconsin, DISPIS writes a new agency rule, and we need to make sure that you're acting in a culturally appropriate way. So everyone with a realtor's license in the state of Wisconsin now has to take a DEI course as part of their continuing ed. There's no end to where an agency could go because there'd be no oversight. And we know there's a lot of frustration on the left with Republicans blocking some bills. And so they could use this avenue as a way to totally circumvent the legislature and enact policy. So that one keeps me up at night because there's no way to stop some of this stuff if we can't object to some of these rules that intentionally go beyond the legislative intent. Another perfect example, and we can move on. We passed the REINS Act, meaning any rule that's promulgated that spends more than $10 million statewide has to go back to the legislature for approval, because we don't want to pass a bill and all of a sudden we lay all these costs onto our small businesses that weren't intended, and now there's no oversight, right? Could the REINS Act go away because it's part of the rulemaking process where it will pause an agency and say, stop, you need to come back to the legislature because we never intended to saddle our taxpayers, small business, whatever it is, with these expenses. So that part's gonna be really scary. So
not having that oversight though, these are state agencies.
Yes. Yep.
So it's taxpayer funded.
Yep.
And it seems like a no-brainer, but obviously people disagree.
Yep.
And it's in front of the Supreme Court. With the Supreme Court right now being 4-3 liberal, do you have any hopes that this is going to end the way that you want it?
I would hope instead of focusing on sticking it to Republicans, they realize we have to function. And the fact is, there could be a day when there's a Republican governor again and they're his agencies. Do Democrats want Republican agency heads writing rules that circumvent state law that they supported. Let's say they control the legislature. We could lose the Senate potentially next cycle. And do they want, Governor Tom Tiffany with an agency writing a rule that intentionally circumvents the democratically controlled state Senate? Probably not. And so I hope we try to stand up for process, the separation of powers a little bit. Perfect example, we lost oversight of the stewardship fund. Everyone supports stewardship in some form. It's the purchasing of more for public lands. A county wants to add county forests. The DNR wants to add onto their current state-owned lands more opportunities for hunting, for hiking, for bird watching. They fixed boat landings. So Ducks Unlimited is super supportive. All these things stewardship does. We support a vast majority of the projects, but there are projects where, as legislators, we need more local input. Does that local township want the DNR buying more land and taking it off the tax rolls? Are these projects supported universally locally? So sometimes we could object and say, sorry, DNR, you're not purchasing this 300 acres in the town of whatever it is, because the locals don't want you to take that opportunity away from private landowners. We lost our ability to do that. And so now the DNR is coming back and saying, perfect, just give us the check. Well, a lot of us aren't comfortable just giving you a blank check and saying, have fun, and hopefully you do what we wanted you to do, or that we expected you to do. So there's going to be a lot of changes going forward this budget.
Are those going to get resolved before the budget has to be, completed?
They need to be, because there are some areas where we literally can't pass a budget until it's resolved. It's like school funding, right? We're going to give more money to schools. We'll see what form it looks like. But we can't set DPI's budget and all of a sudden the veto stands and they get another $325 per pupil for the next 400 years.
Sure.
That would weigh into how much we're allocating to schools.
Sure, right.
So how can we finalize a budget and all of a sudden, hey, by the way, come up with another $300 million in the first year of the biennium that we didn't budget for? So, how do you even practically do that? So the court needs to do this, and I'm guessing they're going to purposely wait until after April because they don't want this to weigh on potential Justice Crawford or potential Justice Schimmel. And so this makes us wait even longer. So it's going to be a messy time.
So they would wait until after April, until after the election, and if Brad had won, then they could still push everything through before he takes office in August.
Yep.
So it's in their benefit. If you're looking at it politically, that would be the route to go. And then if Crawford wins, then you don't have to worry about it.
Right. Act 10's on the chopping block.
That's right.
It's being litigated right now in front of the court. We've got, Hagedorn on the conservative side, who was the front litigator for Scott Walker on that. And you've got Janet Protasiewicz, who I think was the signer of the recall and openly said, bring me Act 10, we'll strike it down. She's opposed to Act 10. So we know which way she's going to go. But that's a scary thing too. I talked to Jeff French in Barron County. I've had other county school administrators. I'm like, can you run the numbers for me if we went back to the days where public employees don't contribute to their retirement system anymore and it's all on you, the taxpayer? It's $1 million just in Barron County for the county, not the cities, not the villages, not the townships, not the school districts. I'm like, where does that come from? So I get people that want public collective bargaining. We can have that philosophical debate on who should or shouldn't have that. But to run to the courts and say it's unconstitutional when it was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, it's been litigated 3 different times, it's been upheld in federal court, it's been upheld in state court, and now with one seat change, we're just going to strike it down because we hate Act 10. So I'm not even saying was Walker right or not, is collective bargaining right or not, but the ramifications of that are huge, right? And so if I was a betting man and I had to guess, they're going to strike Act 10 down. So now how do I set a budget for schools when overnight they might have to find another $1 billion collectively just to maintain where they're at today with no increases for staff, no raises for those expenses? So yeah, there's some real big questions right now that I don't think the public's really aware of that could fundamentally change how the state operates, and we don't even know it's happening.
And you want to do this job.
Well, yeah, someone's got to do it. Some
Bizarre.
Yep.
Voter ID, is that going to be on the ballot?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Yep. So that's a good reminder for folks when you go to vote in April, no matter who you are, who you vote for. I hope you vote in April. So we, as a legislature, knowing that some of this is coming down, knowing we're constantly being litigated, if we can get something into the Constitution, it kind of cements it. So no matter electorally or the right trial lawyer finds the right judge. So this would be in the Constitution. So we want to cement the voter ID requirement into Wisconsin's Constitution. So no future governor, no future legislature, and no future court, unless they go through the amendment process, can remove that. And voter ID is supported by Democrats. It's supported by Republicans. The very few that don't support it, I think, aren't in the mainstream. And so you'll see that on your ballot. It might be a weird worded question.
Always. It's always.
You're going to get upset about that. But that's all it is. Are we going to enshrine current law into the Constitution, which would protect it from any activist court that wants to see its undoing?
I see. So it's because I thought voter ID right now is already a thing. Like you have to have it right now. It's just now this cements it, so the court couldn't just we're just going to get rid of it.
Exactly.
I see. Speaking of the Supreme Court, how do you think that race is shaping up? Because honestly, if you asked me 6 months ago, I would say Brad Schimmel's like, I got a 15% chance of winning. But he seems to be, I think, caught a lot up. I would say it's almost 50-50 at this point. What are your thoughts?
I think I read an article this morning that I heard he's got a slight edge. Now we're going to see. I've heard it's going to be the most expensive Supreme Court.
Well, the last
race.
one it was with Protasewicz and what's his name? Right. I should know. He was on our show Dan. Yeah, what was his name?
Dan Kelly. Yep.
Dan Kelly. Yeah. That was the most expensive in like the history of the United States, I thought.
Yeah,
not even Wisconsin.
So, and here's why this will be dwarfed. So, not only do we have all these questions in Wisconsin on, what role should the legislature play, should the executive play, etc., but we now saw, I think, a story break 2 days ago. People don't realize. So this court threw out our state legislative maps, but they didn't want to touch the congressional maps yet. So we know doesn't mean they couldn't relook at it, especially if they add another person on there. So the state parties obtained an email where Eric Holder, Obama's former AG, sent out headlining a fundraiser for Susan Crawford, I think out in New York, which basically said, come help us put 2 congressional seats in play. And so what does that mean? That means they know if they can control the court, they will redraw the maps again, and they will try to remove a couple of our Republican congressional members, which what does that do? That flips the House nationally. So now you're going to have groups on both sides spending millions of dollars on this state Supreme Court race because control of the federal government House could be at stake depending on if this court wants to suddenly redraw our congressional maps like they did our Senate and Assembly maps in the state. So there's going to be a ton of money. Absolutely a ton of money.
Yeah, and actually, well, it's on my laptop, so it's kind of hard to, but you're not going to be able to see it with the camera. Nope. I was actually just seeing this morning, and I had a screenshot of that email. And it says the subject line was time sensitive, chance to put 2 more House seats in play for 2026. And in this, it says winning this race could also result in Democrats being able to win 2 additional U.S. House seats, half the seats needed to win control of the House in 2026. And it's, gosh, that's not a real good look, right? And apparently she was a part of that. I think it may have been just she was on the phone with, I don't know, all of that. But, that's a terrible, like, judges. I don't understand that. Like, I understand Republicans and Democrats, and first of all, they should just be Republicans and Democrats. They shouldn't be, but let's just call for what it is if it is what it is. That's a whole other thing. But I don't want court systems. I don't care where you stand. If you're super right, super left, I don't care. That should never have a factor. Politics should never come into this. And apparently I'm just living in a different world.
Yeah, I mean, it literally says, if you give me money, I will give you this outcome. Like, that's not how it's supposed to function.
Frick. Stupid. DPI, before we let you go, that race is coming up. I want to ask you about Jill Underly. She's the only one that I know. I mean, know of the name just because she was appointed by Evers, right? He's the one. No, not appointed.
She was elected after he left off. Yeah.
I can't remember.
He didn't leave during his time. I think she was just elected.
Okay,
I think she was the winner of that race.
that's his. That was his old job, right? Evers' old gig.
Yep.
But it was interesting. It was like a week or two ago. Evers was giving an interview. Maybe it was on like Wisconsin Eye or something, or Wis Politics, and they had asked him, "Are you endorsing Jill Underly? Your state superintendent?" And he, emphatically, no.
Really?
Yeah, I'm like, what? That's so crazy.
Right.
That's your own person right there. So how is this race shaping up?
Yeah, I think she's on the ropes. I've heard nothing from districts locally that have been positive from DPI. They make their jobs harder. They're not supportive. And they run them through the ringer if they don't follow something to a T. And instead of helping, they come in and drop the hammer on them. I've heard it from all sorts of districts. I just had a meeting yesterday with some, well, I can't say who, because I'm always worried about people getting retribution, but some college professors who run teacher prep programs. And they have told me how DPI even makes their job harder as they try to teach the next generation of teachers and get them out the door. So I have literally not heard one positive thing of DPI during her administration, which is why
I haven't either.
Even the teachers union are endorsing her opponent. So there's a real crack right now in the education establishment on what to do with this race. And as you know, there's no love lost between, I think, the governor's office and her. So I think she's in for a real race. The state Democratic Party endorsed her, but the teachers union, the main one, has not. And then I heard this Jeff Wright, or is the other lady's last name right? I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't remember their last names.
He's a superintendent from Southeast Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
I heard he's a nice guy. And everyone's like, anybody but at this point. And then there's another, I think, conservative leaning woman that also jumped in. I can't recall her name.
Is it Collins, maybe? No. Someone.
Could be.
No, maybe that's who emailed me. I completely forgot about it just now. Her, I'm assuming like campaign or something. They emailed me like a week or two ago, and I completely forgot about it just now, asking to come on for a show. And I forgot all about it until just now. But I don't even know her name. How am I going to find that email? I didn't remember her name. Well, I'll look it up. Yeah, I'll just Google it.
So coming up in April, you'll have a constitutional amendment on your ballot. You'll have three options in February. They got to
say this one's sooner, right?
Yep.
That's the next actual race, or next time there'll be you can go and vote will be in February, and that's to get these three down to two, and it's not Republican or Democrat, but just Google it and you'll find out who's kind of right or leaning and left leaning, etc. Then the top two, then they go into the April ballot, and that'll be Brad Schimmel and Crawford, and obviously some other local elections. Thank you.
There we go. Jeff Wright. Brittany Kinzer. That's what it is. Yep.
Kinzer. I was way off. I said Collins. Brittany.
Kinzer. Pretty close, right?
Kinzer. It started with a K sound. Yeah. All right. And we've had more questions in here. So I have to kind of scroll back through seeing some of these. Well, this wasn't really a question. Nathaniel Melton, our schools need to have the outdated formula for funding redone. Our northern schools are facing record number of operating operations. Yeah, a lot of referendums going on.
Yeah, schools aren't immune from inflation, right? Their utilities are up. Their staffing costs are up. They're not immune from all the things that you feel in your family budget or your small businesses. You can't find employees. You can't pay them enough to stay. And it just costs more to do what you did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, right? They're in the same boat.
I know. $4.3 billion surplus projected. I think I saw this morning, and it was like updated as a little bit more than they thought.
Yep.
What are you going to do with it?
So we got to break that down, right? So about more than half of it is one-time money. The other half, could be used for ongoing. And I think they're predicting about $1.83 billion in new revenue over the biennium. So you can't spend one-time money on ongoing expenses. Otherwise you create a structural deficit, right? And so the pot of ongoing versus one-time are very different. So we'll see, right? Schools will get an upper. So the problem is that if the veto stands, schools will get that $325 per pupil both years, and they might not get anything else. But $325 per pupil does not mean the same for Butternut and Mellon and Birchwood and some of these others as it does for a district with 800 kids, 1,000 kids. Because, what's $325 over 300 kids? Not that much. What's $325 over 2,000 kids? A lot more money. Now, granted.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought I thought it was.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense.
Not literally different, but the impact of it is
I see.
right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's part of the issue. So it's a struggle. Small schools don't have economies of scale. There's declining enrollment across the board.
There is.
When you lose 5 kids, if they're not all in the right grade, you can't cut a teacher, right? Because you still need one for the 15 kids left. But how do you run a classroom with 5 less kids, etc.? So
and wasn't it when you and must have been back in October, you were on with Dave Armstrong? I think we were talking about that, and I think either you or Dave, I can't remember who, said something I never had heard before. I didn't know, but if a student leaves, let's say, I'll just use Spooner, and enrolls in Shell Lake, Spooner still gets some of that money, and so Shell Lake doesn't get all of that money. And I don't remember what kind of money it is or how much or whatever, but I didn't realize, and it kind of made sense a little bit. I'll have to go back and listen to that part because it was really fascinating. Is that anything that's ever been discussed regarding maybe we should, look at that a little bit differently?
Yeah, we're going to. That's the open enrollment transfer amount, right? So when a kid leaves one district to the other, I think it's close to $9,000. But remember, so a home district that spends $13,000 maybe is keeping, $4,000 for a kid they don't educate, while the school district that's doing the job is supposed to do it for $9,000. So districts that lose kids to open enrollment are going to hate an adjustment. Districts that gain kids in open enrollment are going to love it because you're getting more of the money. But, if the money should follow the kid and the district doing the job should receive more of those funds, it should be upped a little bit since we upped the overall minimum amount for spending.
Yeah, it'd be great if there was like absolutes, like this is the absolute right decision and an absolute wrong decision, and here's exactly how to fix it, and nobody's going to be impacted negatively by this. Unfortunately, most of these things it's going to help these people and it's going to hurt these people. And that you can apply that to just about, I don't know what percentage, an overwhelming majority of things that you guys have to decide on. It helps some, but it hurts others.
And the problem is it's easy to just give everyone a little bit. And then all of a sudden, then you continue to exacerbate the inequities between districts, right? So if we go the route of giving everyone $325 per kid, the district that spends $14,000 a kid is going to get the same amount as the district that spends $11,000 per kid, right? And so you're just going to continue the differences, the inequities between those districts. And many times they're neighbors, so they're supposed to compete on staff, curriculum, extra activities to attract kids, and it's really not apples to apples at that point.
Yeah, that's true. Kalina says exactly, it's chronic underinvestment. I think she's going back to what Nathaniel said. By the state, it's very disingenuous to name inflation as a primary fact. Well, I don't think she's a fan of yours, Romaine.
There's a few comments there. I haven't
but I don't think you actually said that it was the primary factor, or maybe you did. I thought you were just saying a factor, but still, yeah, there's a lot of components that go into it, I suppose. But again, it's the how do you fix it part. And what I hear from a lot of law enforcement, right? We have Fitzy on for our weekly show, and I've asked Tracy Finch, the sheriff in Burnett and Polk County, Brent Walk, when it comes to law enforcement, they're struggling too.
Yep.
Getting people hired. And if I said right now, if you could give $10 an hour more to all of your deputies, would that solve your problem? And they all said, not really. It's a feel-good thing and would certainly help, but it wouldn't actually solve the problem. That's like putting a Band-Aid on it. But of course, if you look around, we've talked about daycare, everything we talked about in education, more money, right? So that's the answer. Just put more money. Everybody just should get more money, and that would be wonderful. But where is that coming from?
Right.
And you only have so much to dole out.
Yeah, and these are the conversations we have every time, right? The pot's XYZ, and then everyone wants a certain amount. I think last budget, the cost to continue in Medicaid alone was $900 million, and that's on autopilot. So it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah. All right, man. What are you up to this weekend?
Well, today I'm going on to Chippewa Falls, meeting with a new group that's trying to start a locally owned hospital to replace the closure of St. Joseph's in that area. As we know, the Chippewa Valley is still reeling from the 2 closures and the Prevea clinics. And so, what role can the state play in supporting that, reinvestment into that community? We see the ripple effects here. OB was ended in Rice Lake and shifted down to Eau Claire, as they're trying to consolidate resources, and brace for the impact. I can't remember which, I think it was not St. Joseph's, it was the other one that closed. They were delivering 900 babies a year. Now those fall onto, Marshfield Clinic, Mayo Clinic, that were already busy. So lots of different things to work on for sure. It doesn't end.
So that's today.
That's great.
What about tomorrow? What is today? Thursday. What about tomorrow?
I don't look at my phone more than one day out.
I kind of do the
I
same
go to
thing.
bed at night, I look at it, and I'm like, all right, here's what I'm doing tomorrow. So it's just full. Yep.
All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? We didn't get a chance to. Sorry, we went a little bit over our time, but
no, I think that's a lot to digest. We'll know more next month as we're back on our regular calendar. Maybe there could be some court decisions on how things operate. Maybe not.
The election, state superintendent election, the primary will be over by then.
Yeah, that's true. So that'll be definitely that'll be interesting to watch.
It will be, and you'll be able to give us an update after you do more of the joint finance, meetings and conversations. It'll kind of give us that update, each month during this process, because it's right. I mean, it's an extraordinarily important process, and it starts there.
Right.
Or I should say, it didn't necessarily start. It goes through finance. I mean, I'm out in Washburn County. I mean, we all know that. I mean, just about everything that any committee does, overwhelming majority of that has to go through finance before it gets on exec, before it gets on the board. Finance is kind of where it's at. So,
yeah. And on Monday, I get to see Mr. Melton. I'll be at the Spooner School Board meeting as well, talking about funding and the formula and what works or doesn't work for Spooner. So.
Oh, right. Yeah, they just got to put a post up yesterday, I think. They have a new superintendent.
Yeah, I just read that. So I'll get to meet that person as well. I don't know who it is.
Yeah, so. Dr. Margaret something. I don't know. Never heard of him. All right, cool. Hey, thanks so much.
You bet.
All right, special thank you to Wisconsin's 25th District Senator Romaine Quinn for taking the time and coming on for a chat with us today. I'll see all of you right back here on Tuesday when Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be back for our weekly Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy show. So until then, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, saying thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.